Another interesting name visiting the Buffalo Bills today on a pre-draft visit, Jalin Hyatt. After clocking a disappointing 4.41 40, after boasting he would clock a 4.29 40, his stock is sort of dipped a little bit into the day two pool. My hot take is that I think Jalin Hyatt can convince the Bills front office or another front office in the late 20s to use a first round pick on him. I will get to my reasons for that in a moment, but first, what are your thoughts on this Jalin Hyatt visit?
Hmm. Look, it's about fit, right?
Mhm.
For these teams, and like there is a very wide range of opinion on Jalin Hyatt in the not just in the like on social media, but like analysts, right? Opinion,
Yeah.
like draft, like so-called pundits, right? There is a
Mhm.
lot of there's not really a consensus on where he is. You see some people saying he could go as high as the first round. You see other people, they have him ranked like outside of their top 100 prospects in this
Mhm.
draft. So to me, this comes down to, like you said, if a team falls in love with him, if a team feels like they truly can, they have the coaching staff and the fit to put this guy in the best position to succeed, like that's going to be a chance for him to do that, right? You look at prospects in the past that went into really tough situations and haven't panned out that were really high draft picks. Corey Davis comes to mind, right?
Mhm.
For the Titans, like years ago. Um, John Ross, right? Like these guys were
Mhm.
picked high and never really got into the right situation. Like Jalin Hyatt to me is a guy that has some very attractive traits, but he also has some pretty big question marks. So the Bills basically have to weigh that and see if like that's a guy they're willing to pull the trigger on above and beyond some of these other guys that might be a bit more polished when we know, at
Mhm.
least from the wide receiver class, in my opinion, day two to me and late day one is really a sweet spot in my mind. And there's a lot of names. And
Yep.
again, is he a guy that's going to separate himself above and
Mhm.
beyond the rest? The Bills are going to do their due diligence to find out if they fall in love with this guy.
Yeah, Charles G comes in and says, if you're okay with Hyatt in round two, then 27 is not a reach. And I, for the most part, agree. Like, if you think a player in this draft would be like, oh, I would be really happy if they fell to 59 and we got them at 59, they're probably also a legitimate candidate for 27 just because after the first 15 or so players, there a lot of the grades in this draft are within the margin of error. It's based on team needs. It's whatever front office's specific flavors are, which guys they fall in love with, because there's really not a big difference between player 16 and player 50 in this draft. There really is not. And that's one of the issues with Jalin Hyatt. It's like, do I use first round pick 27 on Jalin Hyatt when I could have Scott from Cincinnati later on in the draft, or I could have Palmer from Nebraska later on in the draft? There are other dudes who can replicate the traits that Jalin Hyatt has and can do similar things for your offense that Jalin Hyatt does. And they can be definitely had at pick 59 or definitely had at pick number 91. So that's sort of the conundrum that I think the Buffalo Bills fall into. But again, Jalin Hyatt, he has two dominant traits. And those two dominant traits are very, very valuable traits. It is speed and it is deep ball tracking ability. And the Bills could possibly see themselves as needing not so much Jalin Hyatt, but the attributes that Jalin Hyatt possesses. Safeties have to focus their attention on Hyatt, which opens up the middle of the field. The short intermediate areas of the field, guys like Diggs, Knox, even James Cook can benefit from that immensely. So the question is, will NFL DCs respect Hyatt's speed the way that college DCs did? Because I mean, if you go and watch some of the tape on Jalin Hyatt, they are giving him like 15-yard cushions, and he's still blowing by him. It's pretty crazy. Like, he said that he had some hamstring tightness at the combine. That's why he ran a 4.41, and then he didn't run at his pro day. I honestly think, based on his tape and based on his words, he could probably convince most NFL front offices that he is a legit 4.29 40 guy, even though he's never actually run a clocked 4.29 40.
Yeah, and like you start talking about some of those other
Mm-hmm.
guys like Tillman and Scott and some of these other guys
Mm-hmm.
that and it makes me it's kind of one of those things where it's like if Bean wants to swing for it and he misses, like I mean, he's built up enough
Mm-hmm.
goodwill that like it, so be it, right? But if he really feels like Jalin Hyatt could be a difference maker, to me, then the dream scenario would be that like I was just mentioning about Josh Downs in the chat, like if Jalin Hyatt started slipping maybe to close to pick 50 and the Bills are sitting there at 50, 59, maybe they move up a few spots in the second round, like around to pick 50 if he's still sitting there to try to snag him if they really truly fall in love with him. So that's what I think is going to be interesting. A lot of people are talking about trading down at a 27, and I just feel like that's going to be tough unless something like the quarterback
Mm.
is there. But trading up in round 2 to around pick 50, 51, 52 to me seems like it could be a realistic option depending on who's there.
Yeah, John Herring says obviously we should be trying to trade down. I don't disagree, but it takes two to tango. And when we're talking about how beneficial it would be for the Buffalo Bills to trade down, who is it really going to benefit to trade up? Like there's got to be a player there worth trading up for. And depending on the player, like if you're the Buffalo Bills, that's the player you're taking at pick 27, unless somehow miraculously, like it's a quarterback or Bijan is there and the Buffalo Bills really do not feel like pulling the trigger on a running back and someone wants to trade up for it. Like there are very few prospects. Nolan Smith, the Bills like him, but they don't like his archetype fit. They like the player, but they don't like the archetype fit. But another team does. Like I find it very hard to believe the Buffalo Bills will be so easily able to find a trade partner, but they should be trying. And that's why I do think you're hearing those rumblings that Bean is trying to trade up, because I do think he's got about probably 15, 16 first round grades, and he would probably like to move up and secure one of those guys, a Darnell Wright or a Jackson Smith and Jigbo or a Peter Skoronski. Claude Puy comes in and says, Judge, I can make the same argument you're making between Hyatt with guys like Tyler Scott. Yes, I think you could with Tyler Scott, but he says with Addison, Jalen Reed, JSN, Charlie Jones, I don't think so. Like JSN could take pressure off of other guys in different ways, but JSN is not going to threaten the safeties deep. Charlie Jones is not going to get safeties thinking, oh, shoot, like there's a speed guy on the boundary. Addison's not going to do that either. And no offense to Jalen Reed, he's not exactly the most explosive receiver either. It's the burners on the boundary, even though they've done a lot of it from the slot in college. Guys like Trey Palmer, guys like Tyler Scott, guys like Jalin Hyatt, those are the kind of guys that are going to get safeties thinking with their deep speed. It's not so much some of the other prospects in this class. And that's why there are two things that make me think that Jalin Hyatt could, and again, the Buffalo Bills could just be scouting him for pick 59, and we could be overreacting to his pre-draft visit. But there are two things that make me think he could be a legitimate contender for pick 27. Number one is he had 6 catches for 207 yards and 5 touchdowns versus Alabama. Like that was legitimately his stat line against Alabama this season. That's an Alabama defense that has Will Anderson, Byron Young, Henry 2020, Eli Ricks, Brian Branch, and Jordan Battle, who will all be drafted in the first 4 rounds of this year's draft. While I admit that maybe it's not the Bama of years past, games like that, rightfully or wrongfully, stick out in the minds of a lot of general managers. How many GMs do you see in a post-draft press conference be like, yeah, big time playmaking ability. Look what he did against Bama, or look what he did against Georgia. And they point to specific games against big time programs where guys put up monster stat lines. Those kind of things stick with general managers. Number two, the second thing, and again, I'm going to say this with the risk of offending sort of the tape is king people, because I know that some front offices share that ideology and some maybe not so much, especially when it comes to a guy like Jalin Hyatt. Take Kyrie Elam, for example. Most of the tape people last year, the guys who, say like, trust the tape, trust the tape, trust the tape, they were lower on Kyrie Elam than other draft prospects at the cornerback position. But all of them admitted during the process that he had great traits and that he flashed high level play in spurts. It just wasn't consistent. So what does Elam do? He shows up at the combine. He blows the doors off of the Buffalo Bills front office and coaching staff, so much so that they sold themselves on being able to take his traits and his flashes and have the confidence that they could extrapolate that into something more consistent at the NFL level. I feel like maybe the Buffalo Bills did something similar when they were in the pre-draft process with Gregory Rousseau as well. And I truly think Jalin Hyatt today in Buffalo during his pre-draft visit, I think he has a chance to sell himself in a much similar way that Kyrie Elam did last year at the combine.
Yeah, and I feel like he's kind of like the mirror image of a Kyrie Elam on the other side of the ball, right? He's got those flashes. He played
Mhm.
in the SEC, had some good games against tough opponents, like you mentioned, and
Mhm.
obviously athletically tested very well from a RAS standpoint. I believe he was over 9, right? So,
Mhm.
um, a- it shouldn't be a surprise that the Bills are digging around on Jalen Hyatt because, like, was it probably 3-4 months ago before, like, a lot of this draft talk started happening, like, he was kind of up there as being one of, like, probably the top 5
Mhm.
receivers being talked about in this draft, and now it's kind of, like, shifted a little bit, but in the same way, like, Gregory Rousseau was talked about a lot leading up to that draft, ended up get pick 30, I think it was, right, for
Mhm.
him, when other guys like Joe Tryon, right, and Peyton Turner and guys like
Mhm.
that were still on the board, the Bills went with their guy, so and they weren't afraid to
Yeah,
do
and
it.
a lot of people are coming in the comment section saying they don't like Jalen Hyatt. Me and you aren't even Jalen Hyatt guys either. What we were doing, and I was having this conversation in the Cover One group chat today. I I I put a ton of thought into every single option the Buffalo Bills could have at pick number 27. And I think both of us like to sort of run through scenarios, even if we don't believe in that scenario. I don't think either of us want Jalen Hyatt, correct, at pick 27.
I do not. I do
No.
not
There
personally.
there are probably receivers that we would take at 59 over Jalen Hyatt. But what we're doing right now is we're just trying to prognosticate and think what's going on in the mind of one Bills drive. And the Buffalo Bills gave us something to think about today with that Jalen Hyatt pre-draft visit.
Catch the Air Raid Hour every Monday at 9 p.m. on the Cover One Sports Network.